My name is Captain Justin Durham. I am in the U.S. Air Force right now. I am stationed at the Air Force Institute of Technology, getting a Master's of Science in Cyber Operations. My research for that focuses on using Bluetooth to find survivors in a disaster environment. So if there's like an explosion or an earthquake, can first responders use Bluetooth to identify and then locate survivors? So that's what I'm doing now. Previously, I've had jobs pretty much everywhere. So just in IT in general, I've worked as just basic help desk, troubleshooting, fixing printers, helping people reset passwords, that kind of stuff. I've made programs myself for automating scheduling. Um, Random commanders were asking for random stuff. So I've made like a commander's dashboard kind of thing that pulls in data from a bunch of different programs and then displays it all on one page. And then let's see, before here, I worked as a kind of a program manager for an Air Force enterprise level program. So whenever the Air Force wants to unroll, like Microsoft Office is a good example. If the Air Force wants to say, like, let's upgrade to a new version of Word, they're deploying software to millions of machines on across the globe. So they need to make sure that the software that they're adding isn't going to cause problems with the software that's on there. Because if you start taking down like weather software, just because you wanted to upgrade Word, right? The pilots need to know what the weather is, and everyone who plans the mission needs to know what the weather is. So if software conflicts and it causes problems, um, it's a really bad day for everyone. And when you think about like the AFNet, the Air Force Internet, it's comprised of a lot of different software and a lot of different servers and programs and hardware. At any point, any of that can go wrong. So it's onboarding is the term, is a really big deal in the Air Force. And there's a lot of risk management that goes into that. In terms of cybersecurity, so my career field now is defensive cybersecurity specifically. I haven't had to do a whole lot of that in the Air Force, but basically what that means is, and what my next job is going to be, um, the Air Force has a lot of assets, both physical and information, that need protected. So their philosophy now, the past 10 years, has been to develop teams at each installation that can defend the assets at that location. So that might be like defending, the software on planes, because there have been at least theoretical incidents in which you can hack into a plane. Doesn't really matter what you do at that point. It's a bad day for the pilot. As well as the Navy's had people hack into their ships. And then even just public things like the Air Force website or the Air Force portal, any kind of, front-facing location is a bad day because it just makes the Air Force look bad if something like that happens. And then there's also, the military kind of classified side of things of what else we do that I can't go into, but yeah, I think that's it for a good overview. If anyone has questions, feel free to ask at any point throughout. But that's a general overview of what I do. And I can talk about, general military kind of things, general IT kind of things, or some kind of cyber specific stuff for anyone that's interested in any of those avenues. And then if not, I can keep talking about anything. I do know more about how cybersecurity works in the Air Force than how it does in the private sector, just because that's where I work. But I do have a number of contacts that work in, especially contracting, that we've had to work through. So my last job, I had some contractors, two groups of contractors that focus on, one group was just software development that we used for building out one of the programs that we were rolling out. And then another one that was more of a general team that did some security stuff as well. And security is a big deal in the Air Force. So when I was making which was it? No, when I was the project manager, we were rolling out, I think it was SharePoint Online for the Air Force. And one of the biggest things was classified incidents. So SharePoint Online is a cloud software, right? So it's, ubiquitous, right? It's everywhere. If someone were to post something classified there, right? Information that shouldn't be on there. And then even if you want to relay that to kind of the private sector, if they were to post like PII, or effectively even dock someone or post payroll information, right? Information that is now on the cloud and not publicly accessible, but accessible way beyond what it should be. How do you handle that? So standard procedure in the Air Force is if, like, let's say you email someone classified information, right? They're going to take your computer and every computer that email touched, which is pretty annoying because they have to scrub the server too. But if it's in the cloud, especially if the Microsoft owns the server, right? How do you handle that? And that kind of delayed the project by about 2 years because we couldn't find a good solution for that. Eventually they did. And I don't know what it was offhand. They found it after I moved out of that position. But small things like that are massive. I mean, if you talk about intellectual property in private sector, right, you have to have a way for teams to communicate as they're working on projects, and especially any kind of like R&D kind of procedures. And how do you do that securely? And it's a huge deal because espionage in corporate is pretty big, right? So if you spend 5 years developing a product and then one guy hacks in and steals, blueprints, patents, and they can just beat you to market, right? Your entire company's bankrupt at that point. That being said, it's also not that drastic. Most of the day-to-day stuff for cybersecurity depends on your position too, right? There's technicians and then there's like the management kind of level. So technicians will do the day-to-day configurations. So they put in like firewall rules or open and close ports, check logs as needed, that kind of stuff. Which that requires a lot of knowledge, right? If you're opening a port, I don't know everyone's knowledge, but let's say, you want to open port 25 and get some traffic going through. Generally, not a good idea, right? But there might be a reason at that point. Maybe someone can only connect over Telnet, right? It's 2021. Please don't connect over Telnet. But maybe there's a reason for it. And then the technician should tell whoever told him to do that, no, it's a terrible idea. And then the managers will do a lot of things. So cyber planning is a big one. So the philosophy in cyber now is not if you're going to get attacked, it's when you're going to get attacked, which means you need to have plans in place for what if our web server goes down? What if our email server goes down? What if, the internet in the building goes out, right? Because there's a lot of ways that can happen. What if, our data server is compromised? What do we do? What are the backup plans? What are the restoration plans? How do we contact customers? What are the privacy implications? If you work in healthcare, what are the HIPAA implications? Because HIPAA is massive. And if anyone wants to go into cybersecurity, the medical industry really needs cyber experts because medical data has a lot of special rules for how it's handled, which means, someone hacking the data isn't just a security breach, it's now that healthcare information PII breach of, thousands of people. And each one of those is a separate violation of HIPAA. So hospitals pay pretty well to secure it. The managers are also the ones that'll figure out like the kind of planning, the network design, how do we want the network laid out? And consequently, what ports do we need open? What routes do we need? What kind of security infrastructure do we want in place? So how many firewalls do we want, right? Do we just want one behind the web server? Do we want to separate out the web server and the data server? How far do we want to put them? Do we need like an intrusion detection system in place that'll scan all the traffic and look for potential signs of attack coming in. And it sounds obvious, like why wouldn't you want one of those? Part of it is that configuration is a pain, right? I mean, how do you tell what an attack looks like versus what normal traffic looks like? And that kind of configuration is really difficult. And the larger the scale, the harder it is to notice, right? Because Air Force is a great example, right? We have millions of users around the world logging in to applications every day. What does an anomalous login look like, right? If someone uses a proxy in China and it looks like they're logging in from Illinois at 1 a.m., is that something nefarious, or did someone want to check their email at 1 a.m., right? It's really hard to tell, what's kind of anomalous behavior in those situations, which is also why cybersecurity is really important, because you'll rarely know when you're being attacked at that moment. There's a couple techniques that people use, like honeypots, or I'm blanking on some of the terms, but you can kind of like trick people to go into certain spots that no user would reasonably be at. And the only reason they're there is if they're trying to hack into something and you made it appealing for them to go in there. So you'll hit like an alert will get triggered at that point. Aside from that, those are the main ones. Then after that, it's day-to-day operations, which is fine, except most places look to expand, of course. So if you're adding in more web servers, or if you're adding in more capability, or if your data server now is too small and you need to add another one to increase capability, or maybe you need to add 3 more, right? Because now your data is now more important, you need some extra redundancy. How do you bring all of that into the fold without compromising the security of it? Because now each one of those servers needs configured independently to sit correctly in the stack, but it also has to meet the same security requirements. And then in the middle of all of that, an update comes out, and you can't not do the update, because for software updates, they'll almost always say like includes general security fixes, right? Any software, your phone, Windows, any game you play, it's all in there. And the reason for that is what they used to do was they would publish like the full list of here's like the lines of code that we fixed. And for open source software, they do. But the problem with that is if attackers get the code, you compare old code to the new code. You can just look through the lines of code and see like, oh, they changed, this variable used to be an integer and now it's a float. I wonder why they did that. And then they'll start, smashing numbers in and see what happens to the memory at that address. And maybe there's a security vulnerability in there that gives them, admin rights into the software. So you can't delay updates, but at the same time, if you just push an update, right, it's probably going to break stuff. When I worked at a help desk, one of the guys I worked with, he pushed a software update. I can't remember what the software was. It was something innocuous. It was like Word or an audio player. It was something really, fine. So he pushed an update for it. And when he did, it broke the antivirus software, which it was in college and it was a pretty small school. So that was like their main line of defense on the clients on the workstations was that antivirus software. And then there's a safeguard built into the antivirus software where if it stopped working, it would disconnect the internet as kind of a last resort to say, I can't verify that this computer is in safe conditions. I'm at least going to prevent it from spreading anything that might be on it, right? So I'm just going to pull the plug. So effectively, he brought down the entire campus just by pushing an update for something small. And that lasted about 3 days before we could update all of the machines appropriately. And so stuff like that, right? There was another one, our email manager, she was the database admin for Active Directory. She pushed an update for, I don't know if it was Active Directory or if it was for the email server. She posted an update for something and dropped all emails for 3 days, which is also a massive deal. Because when you think about how IT fits into operations of every other business, right? Email going down, I mean, even pre-COVID, right? Email going down is a huge deal. It inhibits people from communicating and makes it harder to send files back and forth. So keeping email up 100% of the time is incredibly important generally. And so you have to be really careful with that. And that's kind of where cybersecurity comes in, right? Because now that wasn't even a cybersecurity issue. That was just someone pushing an update in IT. But at the same time, what do users do when they lose a service, right? If email goes down, but you still need to communicate with someone, you find a way to communicate with someone. You start looking up software, you start going to websites like, hey, I need to send this attachment, or, hey, I need to, merge these PDFs because I can't get Adobe to work on my client. And in order to do that, you have to upload all of it into some random third-party site, right? Which is a giant cybersecurity breach because now you've given your information to them in the process of, just trying to combine something or just trying to send a message. And so it's really difficult. It's basically just putting out fires all of the time, no matter what your position is. That's all it is. Cyber forensics is another really good field. So when an attack happens, generally you won't know, but sooner or later you're going to find out something is going to just look odd. And so that's when cyber forensics goes in. They'll review all of the logs, which is painful. If you haven't looked at like a network log, it's painful. It's massive amounts of text over long periods of time, and all of it looks the same except a couple of lines, and you need to find them. So cyber forensics comes in, they track down everything they can, right? So if you think about forensics compared to, like CSI, like what happened at a crime scene, that's what cyber forensics do. So they look for how the attack got in, how it started. If they can trace it back far enough, they'll try and figure out how the attackers got credentials. If maybe they phished one of the employees, so they sent them an email that said, hey, check your bank account. Something looks weird. And then, they typed in, or, hey, this is your IT admin. You need to do an update. Please log into the site. And users will always do that kind of stuff, by the way. Users will always be the weakest link in the chain. And no amount of training can fix that. No amount of pop-ups will fix that. It's just something you have to deal with in cyber. So cyber forensics will go in. They'll check as much data as they can. And I had a friend that worked in cyber forensics. It's really awesome and it's really tedious. Finding the answers is the awesome part, but man, it's like a puzzle with, I don't know, 1 billion pieces, and you only need like 10, but you have to find the right 10. So they'll go in, they'll like make images of all the relevant hard drives, so they have their own copy of all of the data to work off of. And then depending on how in-depth the attack was, how do you tell if, like, let's say you had a patent, right, that you were working on as a company. How do you tell if they accessed it, right? If they just viewed it, not, take the data per se, but if they just looked at it to see that it existed. And then how do you tell if they took the data if they didn't delete anything? Especially if they created like a secure tunnel back, right? Because then any traffic that they send out is now encrypted. So all you can tell is that they took data, but you don't know what data. For some, if if they took like 80 terabytes of data, you can just assume that they took everything. But if they only took like, 10, 20 megabytes, they were after something specific and they probably got it. What was it, right? Do they want employee files? Do they want to know who works at this company? Do they want emails from the admins, right? The CEOs, like maybe they're up to something that they shouldn't have been, and they're going to use this for blackmail, or they're going to use it for further phishing attempts because now they have all this extra information. Or maybe they wanted those plans, the designs, right? There's a lot of things that could end up being. And cyber forensics has to figure it out, or at least as much as they possibly can. And then that also goes into law enforcement. So I had a lot of criminal justice classes for my undergrad. So law enforcement will use cyber forensics if they seize like a hard drive or a computer, phone, anything. The procedure is kind of the same, where they'll image the hard drive of the device, or the device, especially if it's like a mobile device. Make a copy of it, and then kind of tell cyber forensics to do what they need to do. And the more technical you get into cyber, is where this kind of starts to shine, because there's a lot of things you can do. So let's say if there's a criminal who wants to hide his tracks, right? There's a lot of things you can do in image files. You can embed text, and then they'll use those files, like kind of pass around, like, hey, look at this image. It's hilarious, whatever. They'll send it to each other, and inside of that image, there'll be embedded text called steganography somewhere that like you need special software to pull it out. There's a lot of little tricks like that you can do with files to hide small amounts of data in larger amounts of data. And then cyber forensics will use that to put a picture together. So especially your kind of more nefarious, more isolated, and more cyber-centric crimes. So there's a lot of money ones, financial ones that'll do that. There's a lot of like hacking ones that'll do that. So if you have like a hacking tool that you want to pass around, you can kind of embed links or embed pieces of code around and then splice it all together. Child pornography is really big on that because you can embed images inside of other images, and then kind of pass it around freely, which is awful. I had one of my professors work in cybercrime for specifically for children for 3 years, and it's just tragic. They don't let you work in it for more than 3 years because of how rough it is. But there's also, we had an assignment in class to basically create a fake Facebook as a child, and then see if you can like just send out random friend requests to random kids at some random school, and then start sending friend requests to random adults that get suggested. Or if they send one to you, just accept it and then see if they'll chat with you, and then see what happens as a consequence of that chat. And then my professor was state law enforcement, but he also had contacts at the FBI. So in 2 of those cases, just in my class of like 20 people. So most of us had actual conversations with adults because the internet's a terrifying place. But 2 of those cases actually led to FBI investigations, and I mean that was just over the course of like 2 weeks. So cybersecurity is literally everywhere. When you have kids, you're going to have to deal with the same thing, right? Who's contacting them? What are they doing? My oldest child turned 7 in March. And all of my kids, I have 3 kids, they all have tablets, right? How do I configure that to prevent them from accessing, I'd say 99% of the internet, but still allow them to use it for all the good reasons, right? Because one of the biggest problems with cybersecurity that you've probably noticed as students is false positives, where you're trying to go to an education site, right? Maybe you're trying to go to discovery.com and it gets blocked on the blacklist on the firewall because I don't know, maybe because they have like a video of animals mating, something dumb, or because there's a keyword in their robots file that just says, I don't know, anything, any random keyword, right? Maybe someone just mistyped something and now it's a blocked site. And how do you get around that? And if you as a user know or are determined to get to this site because you think it's good or it has something that you want, there's plenty of ways around it, right? I'm sure everyone has Google just proxies and then just like keep clicking on proxies until you find one that your school hasn't blocked yet, which is pretty hard to do. And then one person will do it, and then now everyone has it because that's just how it works. The same thing happens in offices, right? Like it's not that different. Someone will, like the same situation will come up. Someone will want to access something and they'll find a proxy that can do it. The better networks will use a whitelist and a blacklist. So what that means is a whitelist is sites that are good, fine. So what the Air Force does is they use, I think it's called the Alexa whitelist, but it's the top 1 million websites just by traffic. So they'll whitelist all of those by default. And then they'll have a blacklist go through and block everything that should be blocked. So anything that's a proxy site, anything that's like pornography, anything that's some kind of nefarious or some sign of security hazard or just something that shouldn't exist, right? And in doing that, you automatically prevent any new sites that just pop up, right? Any new proxy that gets made is going to be blocked by default because it's not one of the top 1 million used sites anywhere. But you also kind of scope down the threats by a lot by saying, here's the websites that we're going to deal with. Anything that's not in this pool, I don't care about. And that makes your attack surface a lot smaller, which is super important because, again, if you think about the internet, right, you don't want some random guy in a basement somewhere or in an office somewhere to be able to access your networks in a negative way. But if they're one of your employees, maybe you want them to VPN in. And finding that balance, not impossible, but pragmatically it might as well be. Which is also why cybersecurity isn't going anywhere as a profession. It'll be here forever because the risks are always going to be there, and there's no, unless you can create it, there's no surefire way to prevent bad actors from doing anything bad on your networks, short of unplugging the internet. And even then, there's plenty of stories of air-gapped networks getting breached by sophisticated actors, right? It wasn't some random guy. It was, if you read about Stuxnet, Stuxnet, as an attack back in 2004, 7, 2000s. For me, it's such common knowledge because I watched it happen, but maybe it's not. So the public story, do I have to end? I don't have to end at 8:13, so I can stick around however long. If people have questions, you can drop them into chat or verbal, however, whatever's easiest. So Stuxnet was allegedly an attempt for the United States and Israel to delay Iranian nuclear, I'll say fuel, nuclear material production. So nuclear reactors need enriched uranium at a certain percent in order to work as fuel. But they also, for nuclear weapons, it requires a much more concentrated amount, but the procedure is the same, essentially, to enrich the uranium to any percent. It's just a matter of duration and severity. So Stuxnet was a virus that was very ingeniously crafted and sent to this site. And when it hit the system and was triggered, it basically made the turbines that spin, that enrich the uranium, spin way faster than they were ever designed to, and just shredded them. It was basically an explosion in their nuclear production facility, which is kind of a big deal if you think about like cyber, right? Even now, right? We've just talked about data, but it's cyber physical is the term. So using lines of code to cause physical reactions in the real world. In industry, that's a really big deal, right? I mean, think about like warehouses or manufacturing sites that have robots. One bad line of code, and now you have this actuator arm that can just swing and knock a guy out. Pretty big problems. Some skills that I would recommend that they gain while they're in high school or to prepare for this career field. So cyber is a massive career field. So a lot of it is general kind of IT basics. So having a fundamental understanding of networking is really important. How devices connect to each other in every kind of situation. I would say if you can look at a network map and understand how traffic is routed from the internet to the web server, from the internet to a workstation, from a workstation to a data server. If you can follow all of those paths and they all make sense and you understand the ports that they're taking and how the packets are kind of how they're wrapped, what's in them per se, you know, what's the difference between TCP and UDP, even just basics like that. That's really important. The other one is the Sec Plus certification. It's a pretty basic certification. Almost everyone, well, everyone in my career field has it, but it's pretty standard. It's not difficult. There's plenty of books on how to study for it. You don't necessarily need the Sec Plus cert. And certs never hurt, but you can just study for it or, you know, study as though you would. It covers a lot of things, right? Like public and private key encryption. How, if you're sending an email, but you want to encrypt that email, how can you do that in a way that the receiver will be able to decrypt it, but nobody else can, right? So the Diffie-Hellman public and private key encryption. Kind of subjects like that are really important in understanding how individual aspects will play out. And then you can obviously focus on one area if you want. You're young, so it almost doesn't matter if you kind of go the jack of all trades route or the I'm going to be the expert on encryption. My headset turned off because I haven't had any audio playing through. So yeah, networking's big. Coding, programming's important to an extent in cyber. So understanding logic is really important. If someone gives you, you know, this 20 or 30 line script, right, you should be able to step through it, at least pseudocode step through it. You don't necessarily have to be a developer. I do know plenty of people in cyber that write their own tools, right? So if you want to scrape a website for information, right, there's plenty of tools that exist for it. I also know people that are just going to write a quick script or already have one written. That'll do it because they want theirs. A, they want to know how it's working, and then B, they want it to do very specific things. For attack, that's a really big deal, is writing your own tools because you don't want it to have a signature that's noticeable. So you don't want it to be a tool that's already been used. And again, you want to know exactly how it's working because you want to know what kind of things you're going to trip along the way. So if you enjoy coding, go for it. There's always room for programming, always somewhere. Especially if you can be like a software engineer or software developer and then have a focus in cybersecurity, right? That's also crucial in the field because then you can be one of the few people that builds a program without putting bugs in it that need to get fixed later on. What programming languages do you suggest? Any of them. Python's a personal favorite of mine. Python's really good for writing scripts. You'll see Python pretty much everywhere. If I had to pick one, I would say Python. If I had to pick two, I would probably say like C++, but man, C++ is a pain. Java's also pretty good up there. Yeah, I would say those three: Python, C++, and Java. For a variety of reasons. A lot of the people that I know code in Java or in Python and Java and C++. They work differently. C++ gives you a lot more control of the memory. The reason I would say to learn C++ is because a lot of big software uses C++. So if you're doing any kind of reverse engineering or attack investigation on source code, you can do buffer overflows pretty much on any kind of variable, any memory allocation in C++. Python will generally stop you. It'll flag it and just say, oh, you probably wanted it to do this, because the compiler in Python just works differently. Same with Java. Anything
Justin.
else? Yes.
So, hey, this is Jennifer. So the bell's going to ring, I think, here in a couple moments or a couple minutes. Does anyone else, I know I'm kind of not in the classroom right now at the moment, but as any of my students, if you guys have any questions you want to throw up there on the chat, you can. But I appreciate your information and the presentation. I hope that everyone got a lot out of that because we offer programming, networking, and I know we've got several that are really interested in the cybersecurity piece. So I appreciate your time this morning.
Yeah, I'll put my email in the chat, and then if anyone has any questions more specific that they want to follow up with me on, feel free to reach out. I'll do what I can.
Yeah, that would be great. And like I said, if you guys end up getting a recording of this that you can share, we would love to have it. Again, we really appreciate your time this morning.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you guys coming out to learn more about the career field.